So Jenks is a hard case, it says in the newspaper. He's been for many years, several years since he had one eye shot out while attempting to force himself into a house of ill fame in Suckerville. You're recording. So Jenks made this his stopping place in winters for many years. So he's hanging out at Lock 10. In summer he was a boat. And here's another incident. In 1831, again, when they're building the canal, a guy named Wilcox checked into the Montour house and started walking down the towpath of the unfinished canal. And he passes a shanty, kind of something like this, where the Irish laborers lived while they're working on the canal. And after he passed the shanty, one of the guys came out and started following him. And he got a little nervous, so he kept going on the trail. He finally stopped to let this guy named Barney Traynor pass him. Instead, Traynor started engaging him in conversation. Hey, let's look at this lock pit over here. Isn't that cool? And they look at this lot full of water, and suddenly Traynor begins striking Wilcox in the face and inflicts some wounds on him. Unfortunately for Traynor, Wilcox was a pretty strong guy. He grabbed a hold of him and started yelling for help, and others came to his help, and Traynor was eventually arrested and charged with robbery and attempted murder. Another attempted murder in Millport. This is about a woman who was scorned by a man. Nelson Rogers was a boat builder in Millport. A lot of boat building places in Millport, and also in Watkins, Havana, Elmira, and so on. And he said he courted and won the love of Mary Falls, a farmer's daughter. And it said, the advertiser says that with a pardonable womanly weakness under pretensions of fidelity in marriage, her ruin was accomplished. I like how they phrase this stuff like that, to not come right out and say it very bluntly. Her ruin was accomplished. After that, Rogers abandoned her and maligned her, thus showing that he is a villain and that her ruin is not as great as it would have been if he had married her. In other words, she was pregnant. In the meantime, rumor has she visited a distant city and returned, having been successful in removing the outward tokens of her shame. In other words, she had an abortion. And then she came back home to Millport. And Rogers returned to Millport as well, and he began, saying things about her that was scandalizing her, and she just got tired of it. And she kept hearing all these things he was saying about her and defaming her. And she decided that she would take his life. So Rogers kept carrying these comments about her too far, and she finally got so incensed that on Wednesday evening of last week, she procured a revolver, went to Rogers' boarding house, waited until he opened the door, and then fired twice. And he was badly wounded. The first shot went through his shirt sleeve. He must have put his hand up like this, and it went right through his shirt sleeve, bounced off the post of the door and grazed his mother's head. It was on the other side of the door. The second shot found its mark and went through his upper left lung. And then she ran away. Later, her mother confronted her in town and said, "Hey, did you hear that Nelson Rogers got shot?" And she said, "Yeah, no, I didn't." Her mother was shocked. And then she also claimed that when he recovered, she's going to shoot him again. This lady was really pissed. The advertiser speaks of this affair in a tone that seems to justify the murderous intent of Miss Falls. So this newspaper is complaining that they're justifying her shooting this man. While there can be no doubt that Rogers is the most dishonorable scoundrel, we think it quite time that the press and the public should cease to encourage women in such cases to be the commission of murder. Even in so bad a case as that of Miss Falls, there must be two parties to the error, and she had no shadow of a right to take Rogers' life. He didn't die, he did survive. It also went on to say, well, it may seem hard to punish Miss Falls for her crime on account of the terrible provocation, yet the time must come when some women must be punished for just such an offense, or instead murder will become a common and unpunished crime. The advertisers even seem to be more worried about the reputation of Rogers than they were about her, and they're trying to justify this. And so we are requested to make the following statement by the friends of Nelson Rogers. They aver that Miss Falls from youth was noted for her cruel dispositions, and she was in the habit of making disturbances in school and causing frequently the expulsion of teachers. She was of a romping turn, and she and her sister would often go berrying in men's clothes. Oh my gosh, that's awful. She'd been around in questionable situations in company with young men, was in the habit of inviting them to her father's house in the absence of other members of the family. She'd been conversing with other men besides Rogers, that her reputation was always bad, and that Rogers, when he found out her real character, left her at the advice of friends. So it made it sound like, oh, poor Rogers. You know, it's a classic case of making the victim the criminal. There were a number of strikes that happened on the canal as well. This is one of the first ones in 1841. It says considerable excitement was produced in this village when information the Irish employed in the canal had struck for higher wages and were marching down the line in great force with the apparent intention of making mincemeat of all who resisted their progress. So people had visions of this happening, that was armed, this huge mass of men were going charging into Havana and take over the town. They're all scared to death. So they called out the militia. And they called out the armed militia, but they decided to send someone to go reconnoiter first. Let's go check out the situation. So the general himself and a few men went to Millport without even falling with the advance guard, and this avalanche of Irishmen had cut stick. In other words, they'd all run away. They dispersed in their shanties and were quietly eating their breakfast of codfish and potatoes, as good Irishmen will do. So everything looked nice and calm. But they agreed that on a given signal they would reunite again if there was a problem again. And at noon a gun went off somewhere, and they all thought that was the signal. So all the militiamen all came marching back into town again to do bloody execution, if need be, in defense of Yankee rights. Not these darn Irishmen. During the afternoon, there was nothing to be seen in the streets of Havana but rifles, muskets, powder horns, shot pouches, men on horseback riding to and fro with pistols sticking out from their overcoats, and terror-struck Irishmen running around wondering what's going to happen to them. In the end, they arrested a few of the offenders and brought them in front of a judge, and they were charged with violating some of their laws. So that kind of settled the whole thing. This is another strike that happened in 1850, just a few years later. It involved water and mittens.
Water and mittens, you say?
It also involved the fact that the Irish who came over earlier didn't like the Irish who came over later. They were rebelling against their own countrymen. And they put up a poster along the line of the Chemung Canal. And it said, let every Connaught and far down man take warning that if any of them be found along the canal working after Saturday night next, the grave will be their doom. We're going to kill you. And it also went on to say, let's see, any boss that ill uses their men, as Hess did, he was the boss, this guy named Hess, did or binders them from drinking or thinks to tyrannize them will suffer immediate death. So these guys are not happy. Hess was the foreman, and he decided that the men need to be more dedicated to the work, be more serious about doing their work, and not be so lazy. And he also decided that they should drink some nice, cool, refreshing water instead of whiskey. Now, whiskey was usually part of their wages from working on the canal. They expected it. And he's taken that away from them, and they're not happy about it. Hess was missing a pair of mittens, and he accused one of the Irish workers of taking them. So he searched them, did a body search. And the guy let him do it. But then when Hess turned to leave, the man grabbed him by the collar. Hess broke free, but the same man and another Irishman with a gun followed him and seized Hess once again. He broke free only to be followed and seized once more. The Irishman spit in his face and said he would have his revenge. Hess told the man he was going to fire him. He's fired. Just then a signal was given and all the workers stopped working and began to threaten Hess, who ran away to go get a warrant to have the ringleaders arrested. So the sheriff's brought in, Sheriff Reeder. He comes in a few days later to arrest these ringleaders. Once again, a given signal is given, and the workers armed themselves with weapons. vastly outnumbered, the sheriff and his officers fled the scene. But he hasn't given up. He comes back with 65 men armed with loaded muskets and bayonets to arrest several of the ringleaders. Then the sheriff decided he's going to leave and leave these guys to finish the job of searching the places and stuff. Once again, a signal is given while the sheriff is gone, and the workers armed with clubs, guns, and tools start this furious assault on the posse, which was forced to retreat. And during the retreat, some of the posse members were wounded, and some of the prisoners that they had seized were freed. The posse sent out word to the sheriff to return, that things had gotten bad again. But he decided he had enough of this, and he refused to go back. So instead he called for the militia, led by Colonel Frost, to control the striking workers. The Irish workers finally relented to the sight of this armed militia coming in to end the strike. They did state some terms. The Irish workers had some terms that they wanted. They said that we'll return peaceably to work if we can dictate our own prices and overseers. But of course, it says in the paper, this will not be tolerated. And if resistance is again offered to the execution of laws, it's hoped that through thorough work will be made in putting down the insurrection and bringing the offenders to justice. So these strikes are not successful at all. They really don't get into. These workers find that they're pretty much powerless against the power of the state. There's another strike that happened in 1862. The laborers on 10 locks of the Chemung Canal, which were being reconstructed, because the locks on the canal were made out of wood and they often rotted and were falling apart, so they had to fix them all the time. So they're fixing some of the locks on there, and they struck for an advance of 2 shillings per day on their wages. They've been receiving $1 per day all winter, and the contractors are unwilling to see them their raise or give them any more money. It says the work is in such a forward state that the public interest will not be seriously affected by the strike. So once again, they weren't successful in getting what they wanted. This is one of the most unusual strikes I've found. A strike of one. One lockkeeper decided he's going to go on strike. So he had enough. He was a lock tender on the Chemung Canal, and there was some talk of calling out the Montour guards for one guy. The difficulty was amicably adjusted, however, by the superintendent relieving him of lock number 7. He retained locks number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This guy had 7 locks he had to run on his own. And he finally agreed he would take care of it if they just take lock 7 away. He says, we believe he did not complain so much of the onerous duties he had to perform for the wages he was getting as he did of the lonesome nature of the situation. This is what this guy had to do. Here's lock 1. Now this is way up here by the marina along Route 14 in Montour Falls. Lock 2 is not even in the picture. Lock 2 is down here somewhere. Lock 7 is about over 2 miles away from lock 1. This guy had to cover all 7 of those locks. He must have been riding a horse back and forth all the time to do those locks. But I will say that at this time period, the Chemung Canal was kind of going downhill. There really wasn't much traffic on it anymore, so there probably weren't many boats coming through at that time. But still, he had to cover a lot of locks on the canal. Next, we're going to take a look at boatmen behaving badly. This is a case where boats were towed on the lake from Watkins Glen to Geneva. And a lot of those boats were carrying coal or lumber. And some loaded canal boats were being towed by a steamboat on the lake. And on the way down the lake, it came near sinking and was saved with great difficulty, it said. It was ascertained on examination of the boat, which was the Rock of Verona, Captain Hyde had been bored. Someone had bored holes in the hull of the ship. And they found fresh wood chips lying on top of the coal. So it's kind of obvious that somebody was trying to sink this boat on purpose. So these facts constitute some presumptive evidence of deliberate purpose on the part of someone to scuttle this boat. And the crew that Captain Small, acting for a Morse Run Coal Company, had this boat, and they insured it for, it was uninsured, of 214 tons of coal. It would have been victimized to the extent of over $1,000. He swore a warrant against those parties before the justice and had them arrested. They were the captain of the boatman who was in charge of the boat and some of his crew. And they had them all arrested and held for $1,000 bail. The feeder canal went through Big Flats. And there were a few plank bridges that arched over the canal to let boats pass under. There's one canal boat that employed an African American man and a Native American man. And it regularly passed underneath these bridges and big flats. Now, canal people complained that this is cheap labor being brought in to displace them, so they're mad about it. So they strung some rope under the Ocont Bridge to keep the boat from getting through. They're going to block them. The captain of the boat finds this blockade of rope, and he pulls out a Civil War sword that he had. And he starts cutting through the rope. The guys on the bridge start yelling at him, and they get this big heated exchange. But finally, the ropes were removed, and they let the boat go through. So race sometimes was a problem on the canal as well. This is a canal boat captain, Decatur Patron, found drowned in Lock 13 in the Chemung Canal on Wednesday morning. So this is somewhere probably near Millport. He had sent his boat onto Elmira the Monday evening previous, telling his men he would overtake them there. This is a common thing. Canal boatmen would get off their boat because it's very slow going between Elmira and Montour Falls. There's so many locks. It could take you 2.5 to 3 days to go from Elmira to Watkins Glen on a canal boat because of all those locks you have to go through. You can walk it faster. These guys get off their boat. He went into a grocery store, which is a saloon, and decided to have a few drinks. He'll catch up to his boat later. He'll just walk and catch up to him. But he had a few too many drinks. And he somehow ended up in this lock, and he drowned. They said they found $43.09 on it. The coroner ruled it was just an accidental drowning. There weren't any signs that he'd been beaten or anything. Another popular trick of canal boatmen is if you're hauling whiskey on your boat, you put it up on some sawhorses, a big barrel of it. You took a mallet like this, and you pounded one of the hoops down. Then you took a drill or an auger, you drilled a hole in the barrel, and you got yourself some free whiskey. Then you plug the hole and you pound the hoop back up again. So when the barrel arrived, it was a little lighter than the other barrels. These guys been sampling all the way along the canal. Another popular trick is canal boatmen had a reputation of being thieves. They would always keep a long pole with a noose on it. And when they went by a farm and chickens were roosting in the tree, they would help themselves. They would lasso one of those chickens, pull it on the boat. This is their version of KFC drive-thru. They would have that for the meal. Farmers often complain these guys are stealing their chickens. I always like this advertisement for a boat line. They're talking about people shipping things on their boat line, but it says, the proprietor of this line gives hereby notice they will not be accountable as forwarders for the pillage of any property contained in any package of dry goods, caps, shoes, hats, or other fine articles, unless the same be thoroughly strapped, taped, and sealed. Because if you don't do that, guys in the boat are going to steal it. They're going to open those packages, they're going to steal stuff out. So it's up to you, the consumer, to package these things thoroughly. This is a man, Ransom Barton, who was arrested for rape. So boatmen don't have a real great reputation. And it says this brute in human form is a boatman and was in the collector's office at getting his clearance signed at the time of his arrest. And he supposedly raped a young and friendless girl in Elmira. In Elmira, there were some swing bridges over the canal. There was actually one here in Montour Falls as well for a while over South Street. But there were a few swing bridges in Elmira. You could swing the bridge out of the way. In 1864, the Common Council of Elmira had to hire a watchman to stand on the bridges and guard them because the boatmen loved to run into these bridges on purpose. They didn't like them, so they would smash their boats into them. And the boatmen could be fined as much as $25 for striking a bridge. Daily Advertiser wrote, some boatmen seem to cherish a spite against them and send the bows of their boats full tilt against them. If such violations are allowed, the swing bridges will soon be battered to pieces. So these boatmen were a problem. Another common thing for boatmen was counterfeiting. They're constantly moving on these canals all over the state, so they're very transient, so they're convenient for targets for counterfeiters to help pass counterfeit bills. And this is the case of Thomas Crandall, who was arrested in Corning on the charge of passing counterfeit coin. And I've read a number of cases where boatmen were involved in counterfeiting rings. Here's a boatman. He had a check to help pay for all his tolls he would have to pay along the line of the canal. And he went into I think it was the Bank of Havana here. Yeah, the collector's office in Havana and Montreux Falls, and then got the check cashed. Then he took off with the money. He just left his boat. So he just wanted the money. He just wanted to steal it. This is a strange case. During a thunderstorm near the village of Horseheads, this happened right near where the domes are. I was standing on the canal bridge just after the shower passed and before the rain had entirely ceased, when a boatman called to me from where he was sitting in the stern of the cabin of his boat, a short distance from me, and just as I turned my eyes toward him, a ball of fire, apparently as large as a bushel basket, descended upon the water in the canal, not more than 10 feet from where the boatman was. Apparently this was a meteor. And it just missed the boat. It says the fireball struck the water and it exploded into pieces. There was a loud explosion like the sound of a cannon. And then immediately after was a sight most beautiful to see. The fish came jumping up out of the water. You saw these big fish jumping and flipping around and doing all this crazy stuff. I love this last part here. It says, what surprised me more was to see the man stick his head up out of the cabin a moment after unheard, saying he smelt brimstone. So the guy was okay. He thought he saw some fire and brimstone. This happened in Havana, Montreux Falls. When the canal was being built, the men had a bowling alley. It was right behind where Jolando's is today, Jolando's restaurant. And they sold whiskey at the alley too. So they're not only bowling, they're drinking. And they're drinking a lot. And the women of Havana got fed up with it. So women of Havana turned out one night and set fire to it. Some of the men tried to put out the fire, but the women kept it at bay and the building was burned. There's no more pin alleys there since. Women were fed up with their bowling stuff. Again, this is another issue that involves race. Shortly after midnight in early September evening in 1867, some town boys, this is in Horseheads, attacked a shanty housing 9 or 10 colored persons on the Chemung Canal feeder in Horseheads. The boys had somehow been insulted by them and assaulted some of them in downtown Horseheads. They decided they wanted to get more revenge, so they attacked their shanty along the Chemung Canal. These boys showed up with rocks and guns, began shooting at the shanty, throwing stones at it. The people inside all exited out the back door except for one resident. He stayed. And somehow he didn't get hurt. The town boys got arrested, and it was discovered when the police started talking to them, they'd attacked the wrong shanty. They had the wrong people. The boys were eventually all released, and no charges were filed, probably because it was dark out and no one could really identify who did it, so the boys all got let go. In the canal communities, there also were some colorful characters sometimes.
Suckerville Mandy.
This is a lady, Miss Amanda Mitchell, also known as Amanda Giles, known to the world as Suckerville Mandy. Says she spent a vigorous night in jail in this village last week. She refused to sleep or allow anyone else to. She was making all kinds of noise out in the town. And so the next morning they sent her to Rochester to the workhouse for 91 days. Her offense was a varied one: getting drunk, knocking men down, breaking windows, and raising Cain generally at Corning. She wasn't done.
She wasn't done.
She wasn't done. Another time, one night, in the middle of the night, the fire bell started ringing. Everybody said, "Oh my gosh, there's a fire." They're jumping out of bed, throwing their clothes out in a hurry, running outside. And they got to the firehouse. Suckerville Mandy had broken into the firehouse and decided it would be great sport to just ring the bell. She started ringing that bell. Everybody thought it was a fire, and they were all furious at her. They woke them all up in the middle of the night. And she also was furnished with another night in jail for that. Another time, she decided to go to church. So she goes into church, the Episcopal church. There's a ceremony going on, and the reverend is up there trying to preach, and she's in there making all kinds of noise and yelling stuff out. Well, he finally had enough of her, so he just took his robes off, grabbed her, and manhandled her out the door, just tossed her out in the street. There were two other men there, but they wouldn't help him, so he had to do it by himself. They went back doing his preaching. So she was quite a disturbance, this lady. Then suddenly she turned up missing. And everyone was anxious about where was. We haven't seen Suckerville Mandy on it. Where is she? What happened to this lady? And then she was last seen in a saloon, drunk, in company with two men, and they walked off and no one saw her after that. So the people wanted to know what happened to her. The little boy was fishing in the mill race in Gibson, and he threw his line in and came back with hair on the hook. And he said, uh-oh. They drained it, and they found Suckerville Mandy drowned in the river near the mill. And they didn't know what to do with her, so they just left her in the water for a day. So the coroner got there and pulled her out. There were lots of rumors that she'd probably been murdered, but they could never prove it. So it was just seen as an accidental death. But she may have been murdered, we don't know. That was the end of Suckerville Mandy.
About what year was that?
Early 1880s. Yeah. This is another article. Jackson Hodge died one of the most unusual deaths on the Chemung Canal. He got struck by lightning. This happened right near the domes in Horseheads. He's coming down the canal, and this big storm came up, and the lightning struck him on the head, burning a stripe down his left shoulder and back to his hip, and then passed through the tiller against which he was leaning, so he was steering the boat to the rudder post and down this to the water beneath, taking out the caulking from quite a large space in the bottom of the boat. This guy was just killed instantly. Boom. The man's hair and whiskers on the left side of his head were singed off close to the skin. The entire body gradually assumed a bluish yellow tinge. He was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. And nobody else in the boat was hurt, just him. Just so you know, this wasn't actually a really unusual thing, because another boatman got killed, not on the Chemung Canal, but on the Erie Canal. He was from Watkins Glen, and he was at the tiller of his boat, and he was near Syracuse, and he got hit in the head by lightning as well. And it killed him. He was buried in Syracuse. So this happens sometimes to guys in the canal. It's a flat area, thunderstorms come up, and they're the tallest thing there, and they got zapped. Now boats had to be registered. You had to register with the canal commissioners in New York State. You had to tell them the name of your boat, and who was the owner, and what kind of boat it was, and all this kind of stuff. And if you changed the name of your boat, you had to re-register. There was a guy who had a boat on the Chemung Canal. It was called the Morehouse. And his petition said the similitude of Morehouse to whorehouse has occasioned him much annoyances from rude people on navigating the canals. People were apparently yelling, hey, here comes the whorehouse. And he got fed up with it. So he petitioned to have his boat name changed. And he changed it to the Ormel of Olean, and he moved his boat to the Genesee Valley Canal out in western New York. Even swimming was a problem. Boys would like to swim in the canal. They didn't wear swimsuits. And they're out there showing everybody they're good. So they said the Junction Bridge over the Junction Canal is becoming a crying nuisance. As early as 8:30 in the morning, several boys were disporting themselves in the canal before the assemblage of soldiers and school children of both sexes. Not contented with swimming, they showed off their agility by running up on the bridge and leaping repeatedly from the railing into the canal below. We hear that similar demonstrations will cease after this date. Apparently they had enough of that. This is another tale. I haven't really been able to find out if this is actually true or not, but it's a tale that's been told often about the Chemung Canal. This guy, Terrence and Katie Driscoll, they lived in Knoxville near Corning. Terrence was a hard-working guy, but he never seemed a girl to get ahead in life very much. Now, he and his wife were friends with a guy named Squire Wilson, who was a kind of well-to-do guy, successful man, owned a few canal boats. And one night, Terrence and the Squire got to drinking pretty hard with some whiskey, and they were getting pretty drunk. Terrence mentioned how much he wished he had a canal boat. Squire, known to be a handsome man, found Katie quite attractive. So they made a deal. He got a boat, he got Katie.
A
few months later, someone asked Terrence why he had the initials KD on the bow of his boat. He told the man it stood for Katie Defected. So, the people in the canal culture found themselves in a rather marginal existence at a subsistence level. They were dependent on their jobs and their wages. They frequently lived in a rather isolated space, separated from upstanding middle-class society, as canalers lived in their shanties and in their worker communities, away from everybody else. They were viewed with fear and mistrust. It's a world not of their making, but it was a world they found themselves in. So working class canal culture was a work of everyday survival, heartbreaking, fighting, danger, and desperation. And they tried to make their way as best they could. And that brings us to the end. I want to thank all our sponsors that help make this possible. Our libraries, our local libraries are contributing to this. Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association as well as the Skyler County Historical Society, Montour Falls Library, Watkins Glen Library, and Dutton's Peterson Library all contribute to making these all happen. I appreciate that. Some other talks I have coming up at the Boating Museum in Hammondsport. I got one April 3rd on steamboats on Seneca Lake, 6 o'clock. And also Thursday, May 1st, rowing on Seneca Lake, the big rowing competition which used to happen on Seneca Lake back in the 1800s. And there's an Erie Canal Museum talk by Derek Pratt coming up here in Montour Falls at the fire department Sunday, March 2nd, about immigration in the Erie Canal. I also want to plug our walking tours we have in the summer. We have walking tours here in Montour Falls, as well as in Watkins Glen. The Montour Falls one will start in May and run through August. We usually have one a month. The Watkins Glen walks start in June and run through August. We have 3 a month. We have them on Saturdays and also on Wednesday. We have a Wednesday walk in the middle of the week as well each month. The walks are free and open to the public, and I hope to see some of you there for some of that. Thank you for coming. And a question?
Yes, when are the dates and times of those?
I haven't determined them yet. But
No, when they are, where will they be announced?
they'll be on the website through the Historical Society. The libraries will carry them as well. So you should be able to find them there. Yeah. Yes.
So I have 2 questions. Could you go back to the slide that showed what the talks are, if you would? Thank you. And secondly, you talked about the boatmen counterfeiting things. What exactly did they counterfeit? I was under the impression that most money in the area was bank specific, so.
They would often counterfeit those banks.
Okay, so.
They'd be from state banks. They also did coins even.
Really?
Counterfeit coins, yeah.
Yeah, because I was often told that, if you have Chemung Canal money, that nobody in Buffalo cares. That's just what you
Right.
use in the outhouse. So I was just wondering what they did. So
Yeah.
if they're in Buffalo, they're making Chemung Canal bank money, and when they're down here, they're making Buffalo money.
Quite often, in the case I read, it was state banks that they were counterfeiting money from.
Coins too, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Jan?
I kind of thought this talk was gonna be more on the actual canal itself, statistics, where it ran from, how long did it last?
That's another talk that I've given.
Is
That
it?
was not what this one was supposed to be about, though. It's
Right.
supposed to be about just the
The-
canal culture and the stuff that happened. But I have given that talk as well. I have a great talk all about the Chemung
What's it
Canal with all
called?
that information in your talk.
What's it called, your talk?
The Chemung Canal. The Chemung Canal.
I think that talk is on YouTube.
Oh, is it?
Is
I think so.
Yeah,
Could be.
we just, we posted some of them.
Okay, I did it here, so I guess they haven't posted on the Skyler County Historical
also-
Society YouTube site.
The one on March 2nd, the person coming down from the Erie Canal Museum will include immigration and the Erie Canal. The Chemung one is specific to Gary, and he travels all over New York State specifically for that one. And he has been kind enough to do it for us in programming for the Historical Society. We did it last year. It's on YouTube too.
Thank you.
On March 2nd, we also open our exhibit at the Historical Society, 200 Years, Seneca Lake, and the Erie Canal Waterways. And it will be opening immediately after that talk at the fire hall. We'll go over to the museum for the opening of the gallery there and the history of Seneca Lake, Chemung Canal, the Seneca Cuba Canal, and just a little bit on the Erie Canal because he'll be covering that during his speech. Okay.
The amazing information you just presented here, is that collated somewhere where you can find it again, or?
No, I don't have like any book or anything about it or booklet or anything. No, it's just all in my own file.
Okay.
No.
Perhaps in the
Might be a future good pamphlet or something.
I encourage that, that'd be great.
Yes.
In reference to her question about where the canal went, when I go through Millport, I'm looking, and I don't see where the canal could possibly have been. Because you got the railroad, and you've got the trolley, and you've got the river, and you've got the road.
if the
Are
road.
there detailed maps of exactly where the canal and
Yeah, there are, and, where the trolley line used the towpath of the Chemung Canal, so you see the trolley line, that's where the canal ran.
It went through Millport.
Yes, it did.
On the main road.
The main road was part of the canal in some places. A
Well,
little
it
bit.
crossed, and it
Yeah,
crossed the
correct.
road at one point,
Yeah.
because it changes sides, it wasn't,
Yeah.
you're driving on Route 14, it was on the right side, and then when you get to Millport, it's on the left
It
side,
goes on the left.
across the road.
Where can we find these maps?
We've got them.
They have them in the historical society. They
The
have
Historical
maps.
Society has the maps.
Okay.
In fact, David spent all this time straightening them out.
Yes, sir.
Is it reasonable to assume that the drivers of the canalers, that they were carrying a lot of money because they were delivering goods or picking up goods? So was that an attractive target for people to?
Well, usually my understanding is the money they carried was like that one boatman, he had money to pay his tolls. He wasn't selling the goods himself and getting money for it. That was through the company he was working for. They'd already been paid, so their job is to just deliver the goods. That's it. They're not collecting any money from anybody.